Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. Maryland police have arrested 2 teenagers for the gruesome slaying of a 14-year-old girl. It was an awful crime, but the details are even worse. Both the teenagers were members of MS-13. Both were here illegally. Both could have been kicked out of America long ago, but weren't. A living picture of our failure to enforce our immigration laws. Trace Gallagher has the details on exactly what happened tonight. Trace?
And Tucker, the evidence shows this murder could have been prevented numerous times. Prosecutors say 16-year-old Josue Fuentes Ponce and 17-year-old Joel Escobar, both suspected of being MS-13 members, were so afraid that a 14-year-old girl would rat them out for a recent burglary, they made the girl take off her clothes and attacked her with a machete. Her mutilated body was found this month in a creek bed. But last year, Prince George's County, Maryland, had both Fuentes, Ponce, and Escobar in custody for attempted murder in a separate case. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, issued an immigration detainer, but because of the county's sanctuary policy, it defied the request. ICE says, quote, these individuals had demonstrated violent criminal behavior before, and because they were released in spite of the lawful detainer, they were afforded an opportunity to take a life. Authorities from Prince George's County are trying to pass the buck, saying they transferred the suspects to a state youth detention center. Problem is, the 2014 Department of Corrections policy mandates that county jails notify ICE regarding any transfer so that ICE can track down the criminals. Escobar came to the U.S. in 2016 as an unaccompanied minor. Fuentes Ponce came with a surge of families in 2015. None of this is news to you, Tucker, because you were in El Salvador in 2017 and saw firsthand how dangerous and ruthless MS-13 can be. Last week, after being diagnosed with the flu, a 16-year-old migrant died in Border Patrol custody. Case got a lot of media attention, and those who want stricter immigration controls wonder if the brutal killing of the 14-year-old will get as much attention. So far, the answer is no. Tucker.
Of course not. Trace Gallagher for us tonight. Thanks a lot, Trace. Well, as you just heard, Ariana Fuentes-Diaz's death could easily have been prevented. It wasn't an act of God or some freak accident. It wasn't even a random crime, the kind that inevitably occurs in a country as big as ours is. No, her death was the product of a deliberate policy. Our leadership class has decided to downplay the threat of MS-13. Why? Because Trump attacked MS-13. Therefore, in the demented zero-sum calculation of permanent Washington, MS-13 must be virtuous. The enemy of Donald Trump must be my friend. That's how they think. It all started almost exactly a year ago when the president said this.
So when the MS-13 comes in, when the other gang members come into our country, I refer to them as animals. And guess what? I always will.
Keep in mind, MS-13's motto is kill, rape, control. They routinely torture and murder high school students. They bring drugs across the border and into our neighborhoods. They're the deadliest criminal gang in America. And yet, once Trump attacked them, the left decided that worrying about MS-13 was a greater threat to our values than the gang itself. Anyone who criticized MS-13 was denounced as a racist, if not a tool of Putin. They said as much out loud, including on this show. The traditional Democratic Party, the one that represented blue-collar America, would have been baffled by this. Working-class people of all colors are always the biggest victims of crime. If you want to protect them, don't side with criminals. That was something that Democrats, including a young Joe Biden, once understood intuitively, but no longer. Today, criticizing MS-13 would mean asking questions about the party's orthodoxy on immigration. It would expose Nancy Pelosi's absurd lie that every single immigrant is impressive and must be allowed to stay in the country, no questions asked. Nobody on the left wants to talk about any of this, so instead they just defended MS-13.
He basically seems to assume that everybody is part of MS-13. Very strange to hear the President of the United States speak in such dehumanizing terms.
Is it appropriate for a president to ever call anyone an animal, even if they are sadistic gang members?
Yeah, I think that's something to watch out for. The history of political leaders dehumanizing opponents, even criminals, and using animal metaphors is a dangerous one. That is not something that we should accept from an American president.
I do think there's a serious problem with the president dehumanizing any group of people in the United States, even if they are hardened criminals.
Got that? Saying rude things about MS-13 is a, quote, serious problem. Unlike, say, abortion up to the moment of birth, which is liberation and not a problem at all. That's Nancy Pelosi's position. Pelosi considers late-term abortion as wholesome as a 4th of July picnic, but criticizes Central American gang member with a face tattoo, and she will give you a long lecture about God.
We're all God's children. There's a spark of divinity in every person on earth. And so when the President of the United States says about undocumented immigrants, these aren't people, these are animals, you have to wonder, does he not believe in the spark of divinity, the dignity and worth of every person? Every day that you think you've seen it all, along comes another manifestation of why their policies are so inhumane.
That's today's lecture on Christianity from Nancy Pelosi. The media, of course, dutifully amplified Pelosi's message. She's their boss. That's their job. Vox.com produced an entire video designed to explain that actually MS-13 members are just like your kids.
When you think of the street gang MS-13, what do you see? Maybe something like this, or this. But what if I told you the typical MS-13 gang member in the U.S. actually looks like one of these young men on Facebook?
The MS-13 members that I've been following are working after-school jobs, they're living with their parents, they get around Long Island on bicycles.
There's no indication that we're seeing a bigger surge of MS-13 than we'd seen in the past.
When the revolution finally ends, when this era, this moment, whatever we're in right now, when it finally ends, that video you just saw from Vox.com will be worth watching, a period piece. We're going to look at that and say, it's hard to believe that that's real, but it is real. That kind of propaganda where powerful people are lying right to your face again and again and again. It happens a lot. And it would be pretty funny, actually, if the stakes were lower, but they're not low, they're high. The left defends MS-13 because they can't acknowledge a downside to the open borders they've given us. Once we start talking about all of this, who knows where it might end. So instead, they lecture us about dignity while high school kids get murdered. And for them, that's a small price to pay.